Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 156 of Citizen Dame, the podcast where we really do love movies, unlike other film people who apparently hate them. We want women to make them because men have been doing it for too long and not usually doing it very well. Anyway, I'm Karen Peterson, joined as always by the amazing Lauren Humphries Brooks.
Hello. You know, I said on Twitter earlier, I was just like, I feel like this episode is going to be a scream into the fathomless void of dumb male opinions. And I still feel that in my soul. Like it's just, this week has for some reason been just a time of dumb male opinions. In some ways it's kind of a relief, actually, because we've spent so long, you know, dealing with really, really serious world stuff, which is still happening undoubtedly, and I'm not minimizing that at all. But it's been kind of nice to see some of film Twitter just like debating dumb shit things like, are sequels good? Or you know, what's the worst Tarantino film? It's kind of nice in a completely idiotic way.
Yeah. It's yeah, the horrors of the world still exist, and this week has really been bad for just stuff. And I mean, that's such a dismissive way to say it, but this week has just been so bad. But I think that's one of the reasons why I love movies, even movies about really hard subjects, because they do provide an escape from the stuff that we're dealing with in real life every day and seeing. And it's, like I need to, this sounds terrible, being a white woman and saying like, I just need to turn off the news, it's too much. But the thing is that we all need that sometimes. And it doesn't mean that you step away from fighting the fight, but your brain just needs to focus on something else for a while. And then you can come back and re-energized and ready to fight police brutality and harassment and all these other terrible things that just will not stop happening.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons why we've argued, and so many people have argued for diversity in filmmaking, and that includes creators, that includes who's on the screen, who's behind the camera, all of those things, is because we need those multiplicity of stories, and everybody needs an escape to some level. You know, I was watching the documentary Crip Camp last night, and there was one moment, and it's not really about this, but there's one moment where one of the disabled people who were talking said, you know, I never saw anyone like me. And suddenly in going to this camp, she was experiencing all of these people who were, you know, quote, like her, who had similar disabilities, who were in wheelchairs, who you know, had these other things that they were dealing with. And it gave her a sense of community. And I've thought about that in terms of what we represent on film, obviously. And it is that important that it's not just, you know, we need to tell these searing stories of you know, women suffering or Black people suffering or disabled people suffering or anything like that. But we need to actually tell stories about, you know, love and humor and comedy, you know, all of these other things that are a part of people's day-to-day lives, and have a multiplicity of people on the screen. And that's important in so many different ways. And I think that it is important when you're talking about justice and civil rights for everybody, that being able to see yourself on screen just doing normal things sometimes, you know, or living a normal life at some level is just as important as, you know, as seeing anyone else. Like, and it's also important for those of us who aren't disabled, who aren't Black, who aren't female, etc., to, you know, see ourselves, to see them on screen, and to see people that aren't exactly like us on screen, because it gets really boring, honestly, to see nothing but the same person up on the screen: able-bodied people, white people, males, etc. So I don't know,
So
I was thinking
yeah,
about that.
no, it's true. It's so important. And I mean, the thing is that we don't know what we don't know. And that's something that is a very common overly used expression. And something that we have talked about a lot here. Like, when something's outside of your own lived experience, a lot of times we don't even know that that necessarily exists, you know? And so therefore, how can you tell a really well-rounded, a really deep and full story about people or communities or experiences or traditions or anything if it's not part of your experience and you're not bringing in other voices to help make that story fleshed out and colorful and bright and real? You know, I mean, I was just thinking about that in terms of, you know, not knowing stuff. Yesterday I had an experience where so my mom, she is spending her retirement doing a lot of stuff with volunteer organizations and things. And so I was going to go help her do some like putting together these hygiene kits, but we were killing time. And she's like, oh, hey, we got this cash donation too that was supposed to be for baby stuff. So would you mind running just to Walmart and getting some like formula and baby food and stuff like that? I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I go over to the Walmart. And I've never bought baby formula in my life. I've never had a reason to. And I mean, any of my friends that they don't talk about their experience buying formula. So I didn't, you know, I've seen just kind of in passing that they usually keep the formula locked up. And I thought that was weird, but I'd never had any reason to really give that any actual thought. And so I go to the section of the store where the formula was, and there was another lady waiting there too. And she had already called for an employee to come and unlock it. So this lady finally shows up after, I don't know how long we were waiting, maybe 10 minutes. And it's 8 a.m. The store's empty. And it still took 10 minutes to get help just to open this stupid cabinet to buy formula. And then I couldn't just pull what I wanted off the shelf. No, I had to tell her exactly how much I wanted. And then she's just like, well, is this WIC, you know? And I was like, no. I said, I'm paying cash for it. She's like, okay, because today's not a WIC day. And I'm like, okay, first of all, rude. Why are you talking so condescendingly? Second of all, I just told you that's not what I'm doing. So you're what, you know? So it's just the whole exchange was just off. And then, so she pulls everything off the shelf for me, puts it in my cart for me. And then I start to wheel it away. And she's like, no, I have to take it to the counter. And I was like, what? So then she's escorting me through the Walmart to the cash register. Meanwhile, the other lady also was buying formula. And she's just like, well, I have other shopping to do. And this employee was just like, well, it'll be at the front of the store waiting for you. And I was just like, my gosh, okay. If we have to make it this, like, if people are stealing formula and that's why you have to keep it locked up, let's address the fact that people have to steal formula. Obviously, they're doing that for a reason, you know? So it's like there's so many issues going on here, but it's really one of those things where it's like I've never had any reason to have known about this situation. So therefore, like, I couldn't tell a story about a new mom trying to get formula for her baby because I've never experienced that. And I would never have known that that was something that women go through and that they have to have this kind of humiliating experience. So that's a weird analogy, I guess, but I just think there's so many of those types of experiences that people don't even know about. And they're trying to tell stories that they are just not capable of telling because of things that just are outside of their experience.
Yeah, it's not something, I mean, I would never have even thought about that. Like that's not, first of all, I don't think I think I've walked past the baby formula sections. Like, I don't have any younger siblings. I don't have any children. Like, like you say, I've never done that, right? That's never been a thing that I needed to do. but yeah, there's like a whole heap of issues that are
Mm-hmm.
connected with that, you know, because like you're saying, obviously the reason why they're locking it up is because people are stealing it. If you're stealing baby formula, this is not like, you know, Sudafed where you're using it to make meth.
Right.
I can't think of anything that you do with baby formula other than feed a baby. So if
Yeah.
you're talking about people who are stealing formula in order to feed hungry babies, then there is a whole mess of issues
Exactly.
that need to actually be addressed by that. But yeah, exactly. I don't think that, like, if I were writing a script, that would not even cross my mind that I would address that about a woman going to buy formula at a Walmart.
You just walk in the store and buy it.
Yeah, why
easy.
wouldn't you? Like, you do mostly everything else. You know, I know that there are other things that get locked up, like razor blades and, you know, some pharmaceutical products and things like that.
Spray paint.
But yeah, but still, that's not one that would cross my mind. But that's the thing. It is important that we actually have stories being told by people who either live them or who want to take the time to find out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think some of this is what we're going to talk about today, but to actually, you know, when you're writing something about that isn't your lived experience, we're not talking about, like, you know, I've never flown an airship into the stratosphere or something like that. That's one thing to never have done. You know, I've never bought baby formula. That's something very different. And that's something that is very easy to find out, you know, okay, what is the process that you go through with this? And to talk to people who do have babies and who have had this experience and actually, you know, be able to represent that in a more realistic way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So speaking of people who write about things they don't know.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect segue.
So Stephen King was the subject of some tweets this week, but he wasn't the instigator of them. I don't think it was based on anything that he specifically said. It was just someone came out and was like, Stephen King couldn't write Carrie today, or
yeah, it was, I think it was phrased,
I'm trying to find the tweet.
It's phrased in a very passive aggressive way, because it's actually like, well, I have a question for Film Twitter. Could Stephen King have written Carrie in, you know, 2021 because he's a man, you know? And what actually came out, if you read through the thread, what actually came out was that this guy was not actually asking about Stephen King writing Carrie, which is a very specific thing, but about whether or not a man could write Promising Young Woman, which is a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also somehow he was addressing this to Film Twitter, and I'm like, but the book is
different. The screenplay.
Yeah, the book is different from the film, which both of them have their issues, but these are two different mediums that we're talking about. And you're also talking about something that was written and made, you know, 50 years ago. So you're talking about an entirely different culture. So it was this very, I think, very disingenuous question that was essentially intended to do exactly what you said, which is, you know, are men allowed quotation marks to write about things like women's issues and, you know, women having their period and stuff like that.
In the agenda today, I wrote, Stephen King couldn't write Carrie today. LOL, just kidding. He's a rich white man. He can do what he wants. Because that's so true.
I mean, Stephen King today could write Carrie today because he would get it published immediately because he's Stephen King. Like, he actually struggled more probably in the 70s getting it published because no one knew who the fuck he was. Yeah,
exactly. But just to your point, though, I mean, this is such a disingenuous topic or question, because there are lots of men writing varying qualities of stories about women today in 2021, still getting published. Woman in the Window is a perfect example of that, which that's a whole other thing we'll talk about when that movie finally comes out, if it does. But yeah, so it's this weird way that people have of trying to say, like, oh, well, see, we would reject this art if it came out now because we just don't value the artist. That's how it came across to me. And then conflating that with Promising Young Woman, like, no, if a man wrote or directed Promising Young Woman, it would be a totally different movie. It wouldn't be the same. It couldn't be the same.
Yeah, it's a weird, I mean, there's so many different layers to the question. The thing is, this is not unusual, right? So we're talking about this one specific tweet that is referencing this one specific thing, but this is a refrain that we've heard a lot from male viewers, from male critics, and even from some women, and particularly white women, being like, well, am I allowed to do X because I'm white, because I'm female, because I'm white or male or cisgendered or anything? And it's like, well, first of all, there's a difference between being allowed to and being criticized for it. So would we allow Stephen King to write Carrie? It's a weird kind of, it's a weird mind game, because you're like, but it's very much of its time period and like all those other things. But just for sake of argument, would we allow Stephen King to write Carrie in 2021? Absolutely. He would be allowed to write that book, because men continue to write those kinds of books and get published and get a lot of accolades. And, people still read Carrie and treat it as this great work of horror literature. And the same thing with the film. Would that film be allowed to be made? Of course it would. It absolutely would. Now, we would criticize it, as the book and the film have both been criticized pretty uniformly over many years. And so being allowed to write something, or being permitted to tell a certain story for particularly for cisgender white men, is not something that they have to deal with. Now, I can criticize them for it. And in fact, there were a lot of people that would probably criticize them for it, as they well should. But they would definitely be able to do it, and could potentially be very successful at doing it.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the exact tweet, because I'm pretty sure something else in it said something about universally beloved. Is that the one where the guy was trying to claim that Carrie was universally beloved? And I was like, okay, first of all, I reject your premise that it's universally beloved, because I do not love it, and I'm part of the universe.
Well, exactly. I was like, I don't like either the book or the film, so I think that we no longer can say universally beloved. Yeah, the whole thing was very odd, but I think that Carrie is a good example in some ways, because it is this very female story that is written by a man, that the film is directed by a man who's been criticized for misogyny in a lot of his films, and for not representing women in a very positive or nuanced light. And it's weird to read that as being like, well, everybody loves this book. It's like, I don't think that they do, though. I'm pretty positive that I don't. Like,
exactly. Well, I mean, the whole thing opens on a girl having her first period, and it's not a realistic depiction at all, and that's in the book and the movie, and it's just like, this is so stupid. This is so stupid. Oh, I hate it. I found the tweet. This is from Todd Spence. Honest film Twitter question: Stephen King wrote Carrie, and it's obviously a universally beloved story after 50 years, but ... could a man get away with writing that kind of story and everything that story deals with from the female perspective today?
He would be criticized for it. Like,
yeah.
Period.
Yes, he'd be allowed. Yes, he could get away with it. Yes, it would probably become an international bestseller, just like Stupid Woman in the Window. But there would be women that would be saying like, no, this book is crap. But it wouldn't stop him from making a bunch of money off of it and getting a movie deal.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like you say, one of the things that bothers me first off about Carrie is that it's an obviously male perspective on, and I think that he addresses this actually in some of his tweets, but that's obviously a male perspective on not just being a teenage girl, but very personal things about being a teenage girl, getting your first period, having kind of your first sexual feelings of sexual attraction to the opposite gender. And Carrie's a very specific person, right? And she has her own very specific problems, but it feels wrong. It doesn't feel right. So the first time I saw the film, I remember being like, well, that's just stupid. Like that initial scene in the showers, right? Yeah. I'm just like, that's not Like,
That's not how it
even in the
works.
70s, that's not really how it works. That doesn't make sense to me, you know. And I know that different women experience periods differently. Different women have periods at begin their period at different times of their lives, etc. But it just didn't feel right. It didn't work in my eyes.
Yeah, it felt like a man saying periods are gross and we're going to make this gross and horrifying.
Exactly. And I remember being in and I probably referenced this before, I remember being in a horror class, and the male professor was asking us, just like, okay, well, what is like abject, this whole idea of the abject blood, right? And everyone was like, what the fuck is he talking about? Abject blood, what is abject blood? And what he was getting at was quote dead blood, period blood, right? Blood that is actually just being expelled from the body. And immediately all of the women in the class were like, well, maybe to you. Like, because the rest of us were, you know, the vast majority of us had our periods and had experienced that.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew, and in fact, we've had our periods many times over the course of our lives. And this is not something that we are horrified by particularly.
No.
Men might be grossed out by it, but it's like, this is something that, you know, most women, not all women, obviously, but most women go through from the time there's some time in their adolescence to the time that they hit menopause. Like, that's a reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So no, we're not grossed out by period blood. You find period blood gross.
Yeah. I mean, it's not fun to deal with, but it's, yeah, there are definitely worse things, like boys.
It's normal. Opinions. It's very day-to-day for us.
Exactly. Yep. Anyway, so yeah, he could get away with it. It's not universally beloved, and quit acting like the frickin' victims, boys, because you're not.
Well, that's the thing that drove me crazy about this, because like I said, you know, it is of a piece with things that we have heard from men before, from male critics and male viewers.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm talking specifically about cisgender men.
Yeah.
Who, you know, talk about this as though they are oppressed or something, that like, oh, we're going to suppress white men's right to write about girls having their periods. It's like, no, I firmly believe that a cisgender male can write about a woman having her period in a compassionate and understanding and realistic way. That does not mean that he has lived that experience, and that also doesn't necessarily mean that he should. Honestly, I don't think that Stephen King should write Carrie. I don't think that that's a thing that he should be doing, because I don't think that he has the desire or the understanding to really consider what it is to be a teenage girl, even a teenage girl with superpowers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But the question wasn't whether they should, it's whether they could. And speaking of whether or not you could and should do things, there was a really great tweet. Well, I enjoyed it quite a lot, from Jessica Ellis. And this one, it's again about like if something were made today instead of when it was originally made. But this, I think, is great because it's more in line with how film criticism has turned, and how certain conservative like podcasters and bloggers look at the world nowadays and try to write about Hollywood. So this is from Jessica Ellis. She said, "Can you imagine if Jurassic Park came out now? We'd have to deal with dudes saying they only made the dinosaurs female to be political." It's like, oh my gosh, that's so accurate. And then someone else commented, yeah. And then someone else commented, "Mary Sue the T-Rex," and she responded, "When did that T-Rex learn to stalk things, huh? It's just suddenly an expert." And then someone else said, "And don't forget about them being able to spontaneously change their sex. That would definitely get those podcasters screaming in 2021. And I was just like, wow, that is so accurate. It's scary.
You know, we're going to suddenly hear like some dumbass right-wing podcast has talked about how Jurassic Park is, you know, secretly about the trans agenda or something like this, trying to infiltrate. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like...
Yep, exactly. And then of course some dude comes along, "No one has ever made this complaint about Jurassic Park. Stop trying to stir shit up." Like, congratulations, sir, you've missed the point.
You missed the point, dude.
Yeah.
Like...
Anyway, but yeah, that's a great take on the state of how we talk about art in this day and age, not about how it is made and who makes it. Ah, goodness.
My God.
I know. So another another bad take on Twitter this week. This is just the week of bad Twitter takes. And by the way, if you follow the Oscars, just maybe mute a lot of Oscar stuff for the next couple of days, because we're in the last week and it's just going to get real bad. But anyway, so this isn't about Oscars, but this is another bad Twitter take. It was about sequels. I'm trying to find the tweet that finally made us say we need to talk about this. I am struggling to find that too.
Well, generally, I thought that because we were talking about Scream, the Scream franchise, and it was the anniversary of Scream 4.
Yes.
Like last week. And people were like ranking, what's your ranking of Scream films? And I was certainly like, I think it's stupid to rank Scream films, specifically Scream films, because they're all of a piece.
Yeah.
Right. They're not like, they build on each other. Part of the whole fun of the Scream franchise is that they're riffing on the sequels to horror films. So you've got the original that is itself a riff on horror films, specifically on slasher films. And then you've got the sequels, which are then riffs on the original concept of the slasher, but then also riffs on the sequels to slashers and how the rules change and all of that shit. And it's like, so you can't rank those films per se because they're of a piece. They're part of one another. You can't say that like Scream 2 is better than Scream 4 because Scream 4 is doing something completely different than what Scream 2 is doing.
Right. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. What was frustrating me was just seeing like every time the Scream movies come up, people have to use that as an opportunity to dunk on Scream 4, to dunk on Scream 3, to claim that those are bad or whatever. And I'm so exhausted by that because they're all good. Scream 4 is great. That was such a brilliant reset of the franchise. Scream 3 is a lot of fun. I was rewatching it this morning just because why not? Because I really like that movie a lot. And I think that it's I think a lot of people miss like all the good stuff that is happening in that. And so it's so frustrating. I was thinking too about how like, I don't know what it is about the Scream movies in particular, but out of any horror franchise that has sequels, there's just, it's, I feel like people are the meanest about the Scream sequels. If you say you like Freddy versus Jason or whatever, people are like, oh, ha, 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 they just kind of laugh it off. They don't get all mad about it and try to like argue with you about your opinion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, so sequels generally tend to divide people. And I think we're going to talk about this more in a minute, but the Scream franchise, I remember going to see Scream 4. I think Scream 4 was the only of the Scream films that I actually saw in the theater. And I remember going to see it, and almost immediately I was like, this is great. I love this. Like from the opening scene, I was like, I know exactly what it's doing. It's using the same kind of template that the first Scream did, but it is doing exactly what these kind of horror reboots do.
Yeah.
And it knew what it was doing. Like that's the thing. That's one of the great things about that franchise, is that at each step you're like, this is a riff. This is, using all of these things that we know about these kinds of films and running with it and doing something really interesting with it. And that's what Scream 4 did exactly. It wasn't until like a couple years ago that I discovered that this was like, oh, everybody hates Scream 4. I was like, well, first of all, again, universally beloved, everybody hates. No, everybody does not hate, obviously. And also I feel like maybe you don't completely get the point of the Scream franchise if you are like, well, Scream 4 sucks, because I don't know why. I honestly have never understood why people like Scream 4 sucks, other than, it's like that sort of hatred of things that get rebooted, even though it's a reference to reboots themselves.
Yeah, it's like people just hate it in response to the fact that it's a reboot. They just are automatically going to. I also think part of it is like it really does kind of hold up a mirror to the generation that it's embracing and taking place in. And I think people don't like admitting that they're a bunch of fame whores, and and that's what makes that movie, that's what drives that plot, and that's what makes that movie work so well, is it really does shine a light on the generation of kids that are at that time of the movie taking place. So people don't like being called out.
Exactly, it puts a knife into that, and I think that's what makes the Scream franchise so good, is that you get these films that are horror films, they're comedies, and they're pastiches, right? They're kind of these postmodern takes on very recognizable tropes. And then, but underneath it is always this knife, basically. There's always this like, oh, by the way, this actually does have a point. And, you know, maybe we need to talk about it a little bit more. Maybe we need to talk about the degrees of violence that we're representing, while at the same time we're acknowledging the fact that we enjoy this kind of violence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's always that's kind of lingering in the background of the Scream films, and that makes them, I think, that much stronger as a franchise and as individual films.
Yeah. I mean, they're very smart, and people don't either can't see how smart they are or just choose to look past it. But it's too bad, because there's so much depth there, and it's disguised by this, you know, these horror movies, these bloodbath movies that also have a lot of clever wordplay and just, you know, goofy characters. That's the thing, is like these characters are silly, they're goofy, they're not necessarily like serious people, and that's part of what makes the chemistry of the casts work so well. That's what makes you keep wanting to watch, because it's like, I mean, Sydney Prescott, she's kind of a boring person, but you put her in a scene with Gail and Dewey, and it's a lot of fun. A lot of good stuff happens because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Scream 3 is just so damn fun. Like, quit complaining about what it wasn't, because I know a lot of people wish that Patrick Dempsey had really been the bad guy in that one, and that would have been a very different movie, and it probably could have worked that way. But that's not the that's not the movie that Wes Craven wanted to make, and it's not the movie he did make, and judge it for what it is, not for what it isn't. I will admit I'm a little bit nervous about Scream 5, because it will be the first one that Wes Craven wasn't involved in.
Yeah, the lack of Wes Craven is definitely the thing that kind of questions it, because again, what makes the original Scream so good and what makes the sequel so good is that it comes from the perspective of a director and a group of writers, obviously, who really understand the genre. Mm-hmm. And who also, in the case of Craven, he understood his place in the genre.
Yeah.
And that was part of what he was doing with that. And so at the same time, you know, in some ways it's a very kind of apt thing to happen, to get Scream 5 and to have this be completely different a group of creators.
Mm-hmm.
That this kind of continuation of this horror franchise that is so associated with a particular director, and now is no longer associated with that director, is now going to be taken on by other people. So there is something kind of apt about all of it. I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see where we go with that.
Yeah, it will be interesting, because I mean, it has been 10 years since Scream 4 came out, so really this is like soft reboot of the series. It's not necessarily, but it's, you know, it's gonna take place in another different time. Horror movies are different now even than they were 10 years ago, and so I'm curious to see how that'll all work. But just going back to your point too about, you know, Wes Craven and how he's making this movie that is sort of a loving homage, but also kind of making fun of the classic horror movies of the day, which he was also part of that. But he does it so well. And this is where, I don't know why this just popped into my head again, but some people, they really understand their genre so well that they can make a movie like this, and other people don't. Like, that was really surprising about when Steven Spielberg did Ready Player One, which is a movie that's all about 80s nostalgia and especially pop culture. And Steven Spielberg was such a huge part of that it's weird that he made this movie that felt so empty and flat. And I'm sure part of that was just the story, which he didn't write, but part of it too was just that he didn't want his own work to be a big part of that movie. And it's like, okay, then you're not understanding what the nostalgia is. If you're part of all this stuff that was so much a big part of the 80s, you can't make a movie about that and not include it. Wes Craven was like making fun of his own movies too, and giving nods to them because he understands what audiences want in the modern time. And that was one of the things that made Scream 4 so great too, is that he was able to he wasn't stuck in his time. He was able to understand modern audiences and grow with them. It was really interesting to see that.
Yeah, and so much of the Scream films are about generations too. So the first film really is dealing with, Gen X essentially, or some mid '90s, right?
Yeah.
And then you see that kind of grow and change, and then by the time you get to Scream 4, you're actually dealing with millennials, right? And so horror has changed, generations have changed. What is iconic and what isn't has changed, and awareness has also changed. Those levels of the meta narrative and the views of postmodernism and everything. We're really in a point where postmodernism has gone beyond postmodernism. I don't know what we're in anymore. But because everything has become so pastiche-ridden and so referential, and Craven, as you say, recognized that, and he used it. Right. So he understood, kind of like you're saying, what genre he was working in. I honestly, I don't think that Spielberg has enough self-criticism to really be able to do a riff on his own 80s nostalgia. I think at some level Craven knew what he was doing, because he really was, him and John Carpenter and all of those guys were bringing a serious political viewpoint into horror films. I don't really think that Spielberg is aware of that in his own work. I don't think that he understands that genre is a vehicle for other things.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of the particularly the iconic horror directors did understand and do understand. Horror is not really about the killer. It's really about something else that is going on within the culture. And that's something that they get, and I think that that's something that Craven weaves into the Scream films, whereas someone like Spielberg, I don't think is critical enough of his own time or of the films that he made in that period to really be able to get at why genre needs to be broken and riffed on and exposed at some level.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And now we're gonna really make people mad, because now we're complaining about Stephen King and Steven Spielberg, but the two untouchable Stevens, right? But I mean, I'm a fan of a lot of Steven Spielberg's work. I grew up on his movies, not just the stuff that he directed, but a lot of things that he produced too. I mean, some of my favorite films are from him, but I completely agree with you that it's like he knows how to make an entertaining movie, but I think in some ways he doesn't fully know why they work. Like it's like he has a good handle, or at least he did, on what audiences want to see, but not necessarily why. And I think because of missing that piece, we see in his later films where he's just not able to capture audiences the way that he used to, because because he hasn't, unlike Wes Craven, like he hasn't adapted and changed and grown with them. And I think it's because he just doesn't really have that deeper level of the psychological side of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just thinking about it, one of Spielberg and Lucas's major franchises is the Indiana Jones franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is itself a riff on serials,
Yeah.
that they watched when they were kids.
Yep.
But it's like they understand obviously that nostalgia, but there's, again, I think it's this level of self-seriousness that they believe that this is really, it's fun, but this is also real, right? At some level, this isn't something to mock, this isn't something to pull apart, this isn't really a place to investigate some of the issues that those serials actually had, with the issues of racism, issues of ethnocentrism, issues of white colonialism, all of that stuff. They never really try to unpack that, right? So they're not in the Indiana Jones films, they're not using genre as a way of digging into issues with the genre and issues with the culture in which they were produced, which is what Craven is doing in the Scream films.
Mm-hmm.
And he sometimes succeeds and sometimes doesn't. But he obviously has an awareness of that I just don't think Spielberg has.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do. So what are some times that sequels, and this is just in general, this could be horror, this could be any types of sequels, but what are some times when they work and when they don't? Like what makes the difference? Oh, sorry. Before we do that, we got a question from James, and this is specifically about Scream. So we'll do this and then we'll jump back to just sequels in general. Yeah, James said, if you could cast someone as a villain in the Scream franchise, who would you pick and why?
I was trying to think about this. I really want one of the mainstays to wind up being the killer in the next film. I want someone like Gale Weathers to have like snapped and just started fucking killing people. As in terms of someone who's kind of comes in from the outside, I'm not certain. Maybe someone like Zac Efron I think would be a lot of fun actually, but that's just me being silly a little bit.
I mean, it would be fun to see him just be a psycho killer that's not Ted Bundy, but yeah, I mean, I personally would like a blending of genre of franchises. I'd like to see Scream and Ma join forces. I think that could be fun.
Oh my god.
Couldn't you just see Ma coming back as Ghostface?
Oh my god. It's just like, I decided to come over here and fuck some of you white kids up. Like, yes, please.
Yeah. So I don't know. I like it. I liked, one of the things I liked in Scream 4 was that it was a girl, and not because not like, yay, girls can do anything, but I don't know. I thought it was an interesting way to do that, because all three of the, well, I guess we had Billy's mom in the second one. She was part of that, but I don't know. It's I don't know what I'm trying to say, but anyway, I liked that there was just more depth and more reason behind it. Like there's an intentionality behind who is responsible for the murders in each movie. So I don't know. So I don't know. It'd be hard to just pluck a name and say like, I want this person to be in Scream and turn out to be the killer. Like it's a tough question. It's a good question, but it's a tough one to answer.
Yeah. Well, and you do have to have a cast of those kinds of people, because you can't like cast, Zac Efron and then 5 unknowns or something like that. So it's gonna be, well, I know who the killer is.
Yeah, if he doesn't die in the first 5 minutes, then he's obviously the one who did it.
Yeah.
See, I think that would be fun to have someone like Zac Efron show up in the opening scene and be the instigating murder. That, something like that would be fun.
Yeah, so. I agree with that. If you could be the new Drew Barrymore.
Yeah. I like it. Anyway, so sequels in general. So what makes them work? What makes them not work? And is there ever a time that they should not make a sequel?
I think there's always a time that they should not make a sequel. Sequels are not required. I think some of it depends upon what the film is. I think that when you're talking about if you're talking about something like that Star Wars franchise, right, where you actually have a planned plot arc, right, you know where you want to start and where you want to go. And so those, particularly the original trilogy, works really well because you do have an arc, right? You've got these characters, you've introduced your core characters, you have complications, you have shifting loyalties and all of that, and you kind of you have a very definable arc to everything. I think that some of that is because those were intended to be, Lucas, at least to a certain degree, planned what he wanted to do with those characters, even though the first film works just fine as a standalone. I think the worst sequels are the ones where it's like you're trying to carry on the story, even though the story really has come to a conclusion. So rather than just being like, okay, we're going to make a completely different film with the same characters, but have them go on another adventure, as with the Indiana Jones franchise, right? We're going to like try to add on this extra arc to a story that really was over in the first movie. And so I think that that's kind of where it comes when, if you're talking about films that are like going in sequence, so you've got different adventures, I think that it's best when you have something very self-contained and they're also not trying to repeat whatever the original did, because there are a lot of sequels that feel like, oh, this worked the first time. Pirates of the Caribbean is a good example.
Yeah, this
worked the first time, so we're just going to do more of that. And the problem is that it doesn't strike a balance. It doesn't really try to, tell an interesting story. It's more like, you liked Captain Jack Sparrow being zany, so we're just going to focus on that. We're not really going to spend any time developing him, developing other characters, or providing an interesting framework.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Pirates of the Caribbean 2 came out, there was this whole thing about how like, oh no, I think it was that Lance Hallstrom? I can't remember. But anyway, or Gore Verbinski did the first one. But yeah, it was like, oh no, this was written to be a trilogy. And it's like, but was it though, or did you just go ahead and decide to do a second one after the first one was so successful and got Oscar nominations and made a whole lot of money, and and that's the thing. It's like Star Wars, like you had said, that was 3 parts. George Lucas, when he did Star Wars, he knew where that series was headed, but I think there are a lot of trilogies where it's like they sit down, they know kind of where it's headed, even if it's not written out yet. With Pirates of the Caribbean, I don't think they had any plan past the first movie. It was just then they kind of retroactively created this trilogy, and then they did a 4th movie, and then they did a 5th movie, which was just like, let's just forget that even existed. But sorry.
Well, and no, I was just going to say, I agree with you. And I think that it actually those series of films would have been a lot better if, rather than trying to shoehorn in this plot arc, they'd just been like, okay, you really liked, this story about pirates, so now we're going to tell another story about pirates.
Yeah.
Right.
And you can even still make it about the same pirates, but
they just go on another adventure. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that there are too many films that try to be franchises, and just like, these are not really franchises. You can tell a different story using the same characters, but these are not like, you don't have to make this epic arc, because these films aren't prepared for that, right? They can't sustain the weight. I really want to go back to some of the sequels that they had back during the classical period. So like the Thin Man movies. The Thin Man movies are a lot of fun, and they kind of peter out nearing the end, but you've got Nick and Nora Charles, William Powell, Myrna Loy, and they solve murders, right? And so the second film actually takes place almost immediately after the first one, but there's almost no reference to the first film. It's just, oh, they're a married couple, we love them, they're drunkards, they like really like each other, you know, they just had sex on the train, and now we're going to go and solve another murder mystery. And that's a lot of fun. You get the same sort of thing with some of like the Andy Hardy films and things like that. So you've got these core characters, but each film is its own sustained arc. There's not really much of a concern about, oh, we've got to do all of these callbacks to the previous film, or we've got to, you know, make this all about the epic arc of their marriage or something like that. It's just, okay, now we're going to solve another murder mystery. Now we're going to go on another adventure.
Yeah. Well, and you see this with like the old Godzilla movies too, and the King Kong, like, well, not King Kong so much, but yeah, like especially with Godzilla, there's all these different Godzilla films, and some of them are made by different people, but it's there's different, completely different plots behind them, completely different reasons for them existing. And I think that first of all, I agree with you. I'm frustrated with everything being just called a franchise. Like that's just how we package them up now. It's like, oh, these movies all share something in common, so they're a franchise now. And so then we try to put all these ties, like everything has to be tied to something else. There have to be connections. It's annoying. And I think that, I mean, sometimes it's great and sometimes it just doesn't work. But we keep trying in this day and age rather than, you know, I think one of the things that's good about just having these different adventures, like you say, is that sometimes they're not going to work so well, but that's okay. That movie comes out, you're like, that one wasn't my favorite. You brush it off and you move on to the next thing, you know, the next story, the next adventure. You know, some of the James Bond movies, some of them are good, some of them are not good, and who cares, you know? But then when we get into the later version of them with Daniel Craig, it's like they all have to tie together, and it takes the fun out of it. It makes it less enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. James Bond is another really good example for that. And also, like, I remember watching Quantum of Solace and being like, I have no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, because you're talking about these things that apparently happened in the first film, but I do not remember them. And I found that a lot in franchise films. I find that a lot in like a lot of the MCU films and some of the Star Wars films. I'm just like, I don't remember this plot point that you are expecting me to remember that this entire story hinges on. I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm just sitting there being confused. Well,
and this is where I'm starting to get concerned about the direction. I mean, I'm still down for them and I love them, but I'm starting to get concerned about the direction for the Mission Impossible movies, because Mission Impossible 6 was the first sequel, like a first real sequel in a Mission Impossible movie where it directly tied to the movie before it. All the other ones, there are things that are helpful to know about what has gone on before, but he's got a different team every time except for Luther. He's, you know, and it's like completely different situations, completely different cases, and totally different movies. In fact, the first three, the styles are completely different from each other. They don't even look like they're in the same, you know, same franchise.
No,
And
no, they do not.
And I think that's fun, you know, and I like them all. But then even the fourth one is also a very different movie from the other three. But then when you get into 5 and 6, then they're tied together. 7 is supposed to be tied back into them. And it's like, I'm still interested because I really like these characters, but I think now we're starting to lose what made those Mission Impossible movies so fun. So I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah, really, really what we're talking about is this idea of episodic filmmaking. So they say these self-contained adventures. And I think that Mission Impossible, again, is very good for self-contained adventures because you've got this core team. And then stuff happens and like, oh, you've got to go save the world, or you got to go, you know, stop Thandie Newton from releasing a virus, or like all of these different things. You know, and that comes to a conclusion, and then we go on to the next one, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I do have to say, one of my favorite batshit sequels is Bride of Frankenstein.
Oh yeah.
Which I always forget, and then I watch it again and I'm like, oh my god, this literally takes place like this. It follows on the second film exactly, and it shows how like Frankenstein somehow survived the total collapse of a windmill and like all this shit, and then it just goes off on these random ass tangents, just like, this was literally the first movie was yesterday and this movie is like tomorrow, and I was like, what is happening? This is crazy. And I think that some of that is that James Whale just obviously knew what kind of film he was making, and he was just like, I'm just gonna go fucking insane and you can't stop me.
Yep. What about some sequels that never happened, for better or for worse? Like, I remember being so disappointed when I found out there was no History of the World Part 2.
You know, me too. Me too.
I love the fact that the movie is called History of the World Part 1.
I actually remember looking for History of the World Part 2 when I was a kid, and like never being able to find it. Like, well, I don't understand. There's a Part 1.
Yeah, it's so great. I love it, but I wanted more. It was, the first movie was so funny, and yeah. Well, the only movie. It's not the first movie. It is the movie.
I mean, obviously, I want a sequel to Ghostbusters ATC. I don't think that that's ever going to happen, but I still can dream about it and like imagine a time in the future where men are not assholes, and like we can actually have a sequel to a good Ghostbusters movie.
Yep, exactly. Boys are in everything. I would also like the sequel to Spy that we've been told is supposedly going to happen, but the longer it takes, the less I believe it.
That is a franchise. That is like a Bourne franchise. I do not understand why. I mean, I do understand, but it makes me angry. It's a Bourne franchise. Speaking of sequels that should not happen.
Yep.
But yeah, Spy is just, you're just like, why can I please have like Melissa McCarthy and what's her name, Miranda
Rose Byrne.
Rose Byrne, but also her friend who Miranda, and I can't remember her last name. She is TV's Miranda. Like, can I please just have them all going off on their like adventures, and like Rose Byrne can break out of prison or whatever happens, and you know, Jason Statham is there. Like, come on,
Jason Statham has to be there, and I want to know what happens next. Miranda Hart, yes, I love her. I love her in that movie. She's so great.
I need to watch that movie again.
I just watched it again last week. It's like once a month I have to watch at least one Paul Feig movie, and I go on a rotation. Sometimes it's Spy, sometimes it's Bridesmaids, sometimes it's Ghostbusters. Yeah.
I obviously
all of
want
which
a sequel.
would be great.
Yes, I obviously want a sequel to Barb and Star, and I really hope that we get that. I would like a franchise built out of those characters.
Absolutely. Although, did you see about the Cinderella movie?
Yes, and I'm desperately hoping that like this is actually a stealth Barb and Star sequel.
I think that would be amazing. But yeah, no, I was so happy about that. I was like, oh good, Kristen and Annie are gonna be Cinderella's evil stepsisters. I cannot wait for that. But yeah, no, I want like 5 or 6 Barb and Star movies. And I'm serious. I know we talked about it the last week or something, but I think the next one needs to be at the Rockin' R Dude Ranch in Utah. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, I agree with that. We put it out into the universe here.
Yep. I would like a soft reboot, Slumber Party Massacre 4.
Oh, that would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would love to see someone like, I don't know, who would be a good director to join into that franchise? Let's see.
Emerald Fennell.
Oh, that would be fun. Yes.
Someone with like a really strong visual sense, I think.
I was thinking Kathy Ann too.
Yeah, Kathy Ann is another one, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Who just like likes the kind of bright, bloody colors sort of
yep.
thing.
Yep, totally. So, yeah. Anyway, um, I had kind of thought maybe we could spend a little time talking about female directors and sequels, but really they don't usually get to make them. So there's not much to say about that.
There are a few. I mean, Patty Jenkins has been allowed to make her sequels to Wonder Woman, which I'm happy about.
Yes.
That's actually, I mean, it's sad how unusual that is.
Right, exactly. I mean, I remember when that was announced, and I was just like, oh, wow, look, they're actually letting a woman direct the sequel to her own movie. And people tried to argue with me, and I was just like, okay, let's talk about Mamma Mia 2. Let's talk about, I can't even remember now, but it's like, yeah, usually when a
Oh,
woman,
the
the
Twilight
Twilight,
films.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like when a woman directs the first movie, no matter how successful it is, if they're going to greenlight a sequel, the the vast majority of the time, it's a man that will direct the sequel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of why the sequels are usually not as good.
Because women are better than men. So there.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man. Anyway. But yeah. So women need to make more movies and make sequels of their own movies if they damn well feel like it. And I have to say, I love that Lana Wachowski is now Lana Wachowski and is known and out that way for Matrix 4. It'll be interesting to see how people receive that film.
Yeah, see, well, I mean, there we go. We have women that were allowed to make their own sequels. I mean, and I think that's definitely a positive thing. Yeah, I would be interested to see how the fanboys react to that.
Yeah,
regardless of the quality of the film.
Well, honestly, I think it'll be interesting to see them either embrace it if it's just, so amazing that you can't deny it, or find all sorts of reasons to try to say that it's not. I know people want to like it. I know a lot of people do, and they're ready to like it, but I know there's going to be other people who are just going to be mad about it just for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me a little bit of when the first Wonder Woman came out, and there was some pushback from male critics, and there was but it was so openly embraced by so many people that a lot of the pushback didn't really exist. Then Wonder Woman 84 came out. Yep. And it was like the vitriol, we talked about this when it came out, but the vitriol that came from male critics, it was like they were waiting for something that was imperfect, for something that wasn't as good, for even something that a number of female critics said that they had issues with for a variety of reasons. And it was like they were just lying in wait to hate this film. They couldn't hate the first one because it was so good, and then the second one had problems, and they were like, oh, we're going to eviscerate this film. The violence of some of the reactions was really, really troubling, but that's what it felt like, that they were waiting for this to be bad.
Yeah, like it gave them this weird pleasure. I mean, I came across an article just preparing for today, and I didn't link it because it wasn't worth my time, but I came across this article. It was like the 20 worst sequels of all time. And they had Wonder Woman 1984 in there. And I was just like, oh, for fuck's sake, come on. No. I was so mad. Like, I was so mad that I didn't even bother looking at who wrote it or what website it was on. But it was just like, well, this is ridiculous.
I mean, that just argues to me that they haven't seen enough films, because my God, there are some sequels.
Yeah. Well, another one that people started talking about again this week was Alien Covenant and Prometheus. And I was just like, oh yeah, that's right. Alien Covenant is the movie that retroactively made Prometheus good. Because Alien Covenant was so bad that all of a sudden you're like, oh, actually, Prometheus has some charms. Movies that are worse than Wonder Woman 1984. That could be a whole episode right there. Anyway, well, what is your very favorite, or one of your very favorite sequels, Lauren?
I have many very favorite sequels. Obviously, Summer Party Massacre 2 is one of the best films ever made. Yeah, Ghostbusters is definitely, I would consider that to be a sequel. It's definitely related to the other films. I'm trying to think. Curse of the Cat People. I've talked about this film before, and I just adore it because it takes some of the elements that that you get in Cat People with Elena and who she is and kind of the suffering that she undergoes, and it gives you this wonderful cathartic fairy tale
Yeah.
to resolve her narrative, to kind of find some space for healing in that whole story, and I really like that about it. So that's one that I feel like doesn't get addressed enough because people are so impressed by Cat People that they almost forget there's a sequel to it, and it's such a different film.
It is, and it is very good. I agree with you. Um, I'm gonna call Birds of Prey a sequel to Suicide Squad.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a great movie, one of the best ever. The Scream movies for sure, Mission Impossible 4, and yeah, I think that's it. There are a lot of great. Oh, Jaws 2. I love Jaws 2. I actually think I like Jaws 2 better than the first one.
But is it better than Citizen Kane? That's the question.
I mean, let's do a whole ranked list. So oh man, people. I did find it interesting, the conversation about was it B. Peterson who was saying like
Yeah, and so just to give some context on this, though, there was again, this is on Twitter. There was a tweet that was saying that can we stop pretending that Jaws is a better film
is not a
or
better
that
film.
Citizen Kane is a better film than Jaws? And I was
Yeah.
just like, I don't what. And my initial comment had been that that they're two very different films, which they are. I have serious difficulty being like, which one of these films is better? I don't. That's like saying, do I prefer eating chocolate or do I prefer eating caramel? Like, I like them both for completely different reasons. But so I said, well, the male obsession with ranking stuff is stupid, and then B. Peterson pointed out that a lot of neurodivergent people find ranking things and making lists really important because it's a way of organizing thoughts, and they had a really interesting kind of way of talking about it. It wasn't something that I had considered.
Yeah, same. And I was so glad that they brought that up because I get so, this is something that I'm guilty of. I get so entrenched in like, why do boys do this? That it doesn't occur to me that like there are actual legitimate reasons why people might rank things, or just other avenues of organizing thoughts and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I really appreciated that perspective. So
Yeah,
I'll be a little bit less mean about about people ranking stuff. But seriously, do not ask me if Citizen Kane is better or worse than Jaws.
But that's the thing. It's like, just like, so do I think that some of what we're talking about is ultimately about preference. It's just like, I like this movie more than I like this other movie, and that's always legitimate. When you're talking about a personal preference. If you're I think that the problem that I usually have with ranking is that it comes off as, a lot of the time it comes off as not like, this is, here are my top 10 favorite films.
Right.
Here are the top 10 greatest movies ever made, right? There's a difference in what is being argued there. So it comes off as like saying that this is an objective fact that these are the 10 greatest movies ever made. It's an objective fact that Jaws is better than Citizen Kane. It's like, well, you might prefer Jaws to Citizen Kane, and that's a totally legitimate perspective. But to say that one is better than the other objectively is a really, my brain just can't process that.
Right. Well, and I personally don't organize things that way in my mind. So yeah. So it's a perspective that's not mine. So I don't, to me, it's back to the chocolate and caramel thing. It's like, no, they're totally different. I like them for different reasons. And saying one is better than the other does not personally help me. So, but I appreciate hearing other people's perspectives and points of view. And yeah, I mean, I think on that note, I just want to say, like, if I'm saying something that you have a different perspective on, let me know. Like, inform me. I want to learn.
Yeah.
So, any other final thoughts before we go?
No, I again watch more movies because if you think that Wonder Woman 1984 is one of the worst sequels ever made, then you just really have not watched enough films.
It's so true. It's so true. Oh man. So, but anyway, we do appreciate you listening, and we want to thank everyone for supporting the show. As always, we'd like to thank our patrons: Adriana, Ollie, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriotta, Mason, Matt, Matthew, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Tao, and Will. If you'd like to become a patron and support the show too, it is patreon.com/Citizen Dame. Too many words all at once. We also have our Zazzle store, which is zazzle.com/Citizen Dame Pod. We don't have new stuff up there, so if you've been on there recently, it's all still the same. But now that I have a brand spanking new laptop, I'm finally going to get around to updating our logo and refreshing that stuff. So we'll have some new things coming very soon. We do also have our Ko-Fi, which is ko-fi.com/Citizen Dame. If you want to support the show, but you don't want a commitment and don't want merch or anything like that, you can go there. We have our website, citizendamepod.com, where we have some new stuff coming. I know we keep saying that, but we really do. Lots of good things coming our way.
We do. My Barb and Star review should be up by the time we've released this episode generally. So
Woo-hoo.
yes,
Yay.
that will be up. I've had a lot of fun writing that review, and I will recommend the Blu-ray right now because there's some fun shit on there.
I bought it this week because I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. I want that movie. I need to watch it again 500 more times, and I'm going to watch it today because it's so good. Yeah. And you can email us if you want to, citizendamepod@gmail.com. We also are available on Twitter and Instagram at citizendamepod. And we can be reached individually too. Lauren, where are you?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at LHBusiness.
And I am on Twitter and Instagram at Karen M. Peterson. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Are you suggesting that someone's trying to make a real-life sequel?
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
No, come on, man.
Oh, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
It's bullshit generalization. Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah?
Name one.
Yeah.
Aliens. Far better than the first.
Yeah, well, there's no accounting for taste.
Thank you, Ridley Scott rules. Name another.
No. Aliens is a classic, okay? Get away from her, you bitch.
I believe the line is stay away from her, you bitch. It's film class, right?
Yeah. Gotcha. Whatever, you know what I mean.
Another.
T2.
You've got a hard-on for Cameron.
Big one.
But wait a second. The first Terminator is historical.
Yeah. Sarah Connor. Yes. Wait, phone.
All right, okay. House 2, the second story.
The entire horror genre was destroyed by sequels.
I got it, by the way. I got it. The Godfather, Part 2.
Good. That's the Oscar-winning
All right, that's enough. That'll be a wrap. The sequel discussion to be continued.